50 professional nannies. Every single one hired to care for the billionaire's 4-year-old son quit or was fired. Until the day the gardener's 3-year-old daughter, with mud on her knees and a leaf caught in her hair, wandered into the nursery and did what millions of dollars in expert care could not. This is the story of two people living in the same house, moving in utterly separate orbits. Oliver Thorne, the fourth richest man under 40, who had built a $3 billion tech empire but could not find a single person to connect with his son. And Joseph Mbatha, the soft-spoken gardener who lived in the estate's cottage, whose 3-year-old daughter, Amara, had never seen a room she believed was off limits. The question was never about money or resources. It was about something far more fragile, and it was already breaking. The silence in the main house was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was full of every sound that wasn't there. No laughter, no running feet, no questions asked in a small, bright voice. Oliver Thorne moved through its 15,000 square feet like a man auditing a museum of a life he could no longer access. His focus, the relentless drive that had built Nexus Systems from a dorm room project into a global data giant, had narrowed to a single, impossible problem: his son, Leo. Leo was 4 years old. A diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, coupled with a profound nonverbal anxiety, had turned the world into a maze of overwhelming sensations. A door closing too loudly could mean 3 hours of silent, shut-down withdrawal. The wrong texture of a sock could unravel an entire day. Oliver had thrown every resource at it. The best behavioral therapists from Boston, occupational specialists from Switzerland, speech pathologists who flew in on private charts. They had protocols, data sheets, progress graphs. And for a while, it seemed like a problem he could solve with the right application of capital and logic. Then came the nannies. The first was a highly recommended professional with a degree in child development. She lasted 11 days. The second, a specialist in sensory integration, made it 3 weeks. The third walked out after a single morning, leaving her bag in the foyer. Oliver didn't fire them. They quit. They quit because Leo would not look at them, would not respond to their carefully planned activities, would sometimes scream for hours in a high, desperate frequency that vibrated in the bones of the house. Oliver stopped hearing through word of mouth. He went to elite agencies in Manhattan and London. He offered salaries that dwarfed CEO pay, signing bonuses, private suites in the East Wing. The result was always the same. The turnover became a logistical crisis. The head of the agency, a polished woman named Evelyn who handled only billionaire clients, finally placed a discreet red asterisk next to the Thorne account in their system. It meant extreme difficulty, placement not guaranteed. 50 caregivers in 22 months. Some left in tears, others in cold, professional anger. One, a man named David with 8 years of experience, sat in the kitchen with head in his hands after a particularly difficult day and said to the housekeeper, "It's not the boy, it's the silence. The whole house feels like it's holding its breath." He was gone by the end of the week. Oliver began to see the pattern not as a series of failures, but as a horrifying equation he couldn't balance. His money, which could bend markets and launch satellites, was useless here. It could only buy more of what had already failed. He implemented systems. A laminated sheet, just like in the story you know, was posted inside the staff entrance. Rule 1, do not enter the nursery unannounced. Rule 4, do not attempt physical contact unless initiated by Leo. Rule 7, all toys must be sanitized and returned to their designated shelves before leaving. There were 23 rules. They were not for Leo. They were for the parade of strangers who kept failing to understand him. Oliver would stand at the one-way observation window installed in the nursery wall, watching another highly paid professional slowly deflate in the face of his son's silent world, and feel a cold certainty solidify in his chest. He was failing. The one thing that truly mattered, and he was failing. On the other side of the immaculate boxwood hedge, in the 3-room gardener's cottage, a different kind of calculus governed life. Joseph Mbatha kept the 12-acre grounds in a state of controlled, vibrant perfection. He knew the name of every rose cultivar, the precise feeding schedule for the ancient oak trees, the secret to the emerald green lawn. He worked from dawn until dusk, his hands permanently etched with soil, his movements slow and sure. His wife, Grace, had passed away 2 years earlier, a sudden fever that no hospital in their rural province could cure in time. He had come to this country with his daughter for a fresh start, for the quiet dignity of work he understood. His daughter, Amara, was 3 years and 4 months old. She lived in a world of direct sensation. Dirt was for digging, flowers were for smelling, and every closed door was an invitation to discover what was on the other side. Her hair was a cloud of dark curls that resisted all attempts at tamming. Her constant companion was a worn stuffed giraffe named Kobo, missing one eye. Joseph's babysitting arrangement was a fragile chain of favors with other staff members, and it broke more often than it held. On those days, Amara came to work with him. She would sit on a blanket under the cypress tree with Kobo and a picture book, or trail behind him with a tiny, blunt trowel, helping to weed the flower beds. She was not quiet, but her noise was the sound of life, a running commentary, a song hummed off-key, a question asked for the 10th time. She knew the main house was a different country. Her father had told her, "That is Mr. Thorne's house. We do not go in unless we are called." She had seen the boy sometimes in the window of a room on the second floor. He was pale, with hair the color of sun on wheat, and he never waved back. She thought he looked lonely. She thought a lot of things she didn't say because her understanding ran deeper than her vocabulary. The two worlds were maintained by a single, weary linchpin. Sophia, the head housekeeper, a woman in her late 50s who had managed the Thorne estate for a decade, she operated on a philosophy of compassionate efficiency. She saw Oliver's exhaustion, a brittle shell around a core of desperation. She saw Joseph's quiet grief and the constant worry in his eyes when his childcare fell through. And she saw the unbroken line of nannies arriving with hopeful smiles and leaving with hollowed-out stares. One afternoon, after the 43rd nanny had handed in her resignation, Sophia made a decision that bent the rules. She found Joseph in the potting shed, Amara on his hips smearing mud on his shirt. "From tomorrow," Sophia said, her voice low, "if your sister cannot take her, the girl can stay in the staff sitting room, the one next to the kitchen. It is warm and there is a small television. It is not allowed, but it is better than her being alone in the cottage." Joseph's gratitude was a profound, silent thing. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. It was a risk for Sophia, but she had calculated the margins. Oliver Thorne never entered the staff areas. He existed in the main halls, his study, the nursery. The rest of the house was her domain. For 2 weeks the system held. Amara would color in a book on the sitting room floor while Sophia worked. She learned to be very quiet when in the main halls, a game she played with intense seriousness. She called Sophia Auntie and believed the giant, silent house was a castle with a sad prince locked in a tower. Then on a Thursday morning in April, the chain broke again. Sophia was called away urgently, a plumbing disaster in the guest wing bathroom. "You stay here, little one. Do not move." "I will be 10 minutes, she instructed, placing a bowl of apple slices beside Amara. Amara waited. She counted to 50, which was the highest number she knew. She ate 2 apple slices. Kobo, she decided, wanted to see the castle properly. Holding her giraffe by its neck, she pushed open the heavy door of the sitting room and peered into the long, polished hallway. It was empty, and at the far end she saw it, a beautiful carved wooden door slightly ajar. A sliver of soft yellow light spilled onto the floor. It was the one room she had never seen. The nursery door was always shut. But today it was open, just a crack. She walked toward it, her socked feet making no sound on the runner. She pushed the door gently. It swung open without a creak. The room was huge, filled with soft light from a high window. Toys of every description lined pristine white shelves, untouched. And in the center of a vast blue rug, sitting with his back to her, was the boy from the window. He was arranging a row of identical red blocks in a perfectly straight line. He did not turn. He did not seem to know she was there. Amara stood in the doorway, Kobo dangling from her hand. She looked at the boy's concentration, the tense set of his small shoulders. She looked at the 50 perfect toys gathering dust. She took one step into the room, then another. She did not know Rule 1. She did not know Rule 4. She only knew that the boy looked sad and she had never met a giraffe who didn't want to say hello. She did not speak, not at first. Amara walked across the ocean of blue rug, her eyes fixed on the line of red blocks. She didn't touch them, she didn't touch him. She sat down cross-legged about 2 feet away from Leo's side and placed Kobo the giraffe in her lap. She waited. Leo's hands, which had been frozen in the act of placing the final block, trembled slightly. He did not look at her, but he didn't scream. He didn't withdraw. For a full minute, the only sound was the distant hum of the house's climate system. Then Amara lay down on her stomach, her chin propped on her hands so that her face was level with the line of blocks. She blew a soft, deliberate breath across the top of the neat row. The blocks didn't move. Leo's eyes flickered down, then back to his own hands. Amara smiled. She did it again. This time, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound escaped Leo, a huff of air, not a word but a response. Amara grinned wider. She pointed at the block nearest to her. "Red," she announced, as if introducing a friend. Then she pointed at Kobo's remaining eye. "Brown." Leo slowly turned his head, not to look at her face but at the spot on the rug between them. His gaze was distant, cloudy. Amara didn't push. She just started talking. She told him about the worm she and her daddy found that morning and how it was wiggly. She told him the sky was blue, but sometimes it was gray, and that was okay too. Her words were a gentle, aimless stream, filling the silent space without demanding anything back. And then, after 5 minutes of this one-sided conversation, Leo reached out. Not for her. Not for Kobo. He picked up the red block nearest to Amara and placed it carefully on top of another, making a tower of 2. Amara's eyes lit up. "Tall," she whispered. She picked up a third block and placed it next to his tower. Not on it, beside it. Leo watched her hand. He let it happen. He then took a fourth block and placed it on top of her block. They were not playing together, not in any conventional sense. They were building 2 separate, adjacent structures in a shared silence, but they were sharing it. For the first time in living memory, Leo was in a room with another child and he was not recoiling. This was the scene Sophia walked in on. She stood in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth, her blood running cold. She saw the mud-stained overalls on her pristine rug, the gardener's daughter sitting inches from Oliver Thorne's son. She saw the unthinkable, Leo engaged. Not happily, but present asterisk. Her first instinct was terror. She rushed forward, ready to scoop Amara up, to profusely apologize to the empty air, expecting a catastrophic meltdown from Leo at the interruption. But Leo didn't scream. He flinched, his body tightening, his eyes squeezing shut. But as Sophia's shadow fell over them, he opened one eye, looked past her at Amara, and then slowly, deliberately picked up another block. It was a defiance so quiet Sophia almost missed it. A signal, "I am not done." Sophia froze mid-step. Her professional mind warred with something deeper, something maternal. She backed away. She retreated to the doorway and watched for 3 more minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then she pulled the door almost closed, leaving it open a crack, and went to find Joseph. She found him trimming the ivy on the south wall. "Joseph, your daughter, she is in the nursery." The color drained from his face. He dropped his shears. "I will get her. I am so sorry, Sophia, she must have wandered." "Wait," Sophia put a hand on his arm. She is with Leo. They are playing." The word felt foreign and miraculous. Joseph stared at her, uncomprehending. "Playing, but the boy, he does not." "I know, come see, but be quiet like a mouse." They stood at the cracked door. Joseph saw his daughter, a smudge of earth and color in the sterile room, her head tilted as she watched Leo now stack a block sideways. Leo's brow was furrowed in deep concentration, his movements methodical. Amara copied him, stacking one of her sideways. She giggled when it fell. Leo did not laugh, but the tension around his mouth softened by a fraction. Joseph felt a surge of fear that was instantly tangled with a fierce, protective pride. This was a boundary he had never dreamed of crossing. The consequences could be immediate dismissal. He made to go in. "No," Sophia whispered firmly. "Look at him, really look." Joseph looked. He saw what she saw. The boy was not relaxed, but he was not in distress. He was, for perhaps the first time in this house, interacting with his environment in a way that included another person. It was fragile, wordless, and built of red blocks, but it was there. "Mr. Thorne," Joseph breathed, "is in his study on a conference call with Singapore," Sophia said, her voice low and urgent. "He will be there for an hour. We have an hour." They made a pact in that hallway without a word being spoken. Sophia would stand guard. Joseph would wait nearby. They would let this impossible moment play out until the natural end, or until Oliver emerged. They were breaking a dozen rules, risking their jobs, for a quiet miracle they couldn't explain. The miracle lasted 22 minutes. It ended when Amara, growing bored with blocks, stood up and walked to the shelf of untouched, expensive toys. She bypassed the interactive robots and the sensory light panels. She reached for the one thing that looked familiar, a simple wooden car. She brought it back, sat down, and pushed it toward Leo. It rolled and bumped against his knee. Leo looked at the car. He looked at Amara. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and then set it carefully on the floor. He didn't push it, but he didn't throw it. He just studied it. Amara took that as invitation enough. She found another car. Soon they had a small fleet parked between their two block towers. They weren't racing them or making sounds. They were curating a silent, shared collection. When Amara finally yawned, rubbing her eyes with muddy fists, Sophia knew it was time. She slipped into the room. "Come, little sunbeam, time for lunch." Amara stood obediently. She looked at Leo. "Bye, Leo," she said, the name easy on her tongue. Leo did not respond. He kept his eyes on the wooden cars. But as Amara reached the door, holding Sophia's hand, he did something that made Sophia's breath catch. He picked up the car she had first given him and held it tightly in his fist, his knuckles white. Oliver Thorne knew nothing of this. He emerged from his study 90 minutes later, the acrid taste of a difficult negotiation in his mouth. He went straight to the nursery. Leo was in his usual spot by the window, rocking slightly, a single red block held against his chest. Nothing seemed amiss. The room was perfectly ordered. Yet, as Oliver stood at the observation window, a nagging, illogical thought occurred to him. The blocks were not in their usual, rigid line. They were in two small, messy clusters, and between them, side by side, were two wooden cars that usually lived on the high shelf. Oliver frowned. He made a mental note to ask the new nanny, a woman named Celia who was starting the next day, about structured play activities. He assumed it was a failed and messy attempt by the previous caretaker. The next day, Celia arrived. She was bright, credentialed, and armed with a binder full of approved techniques. Oliver, watching from behind the mirror, saw it unravel in real time. Leo refused to make eye contact with her. He ignored her pleasant, modulated voice. When she gently tried to guide his hand toward a puzzle, he let out a low, distressed hum that built into a cry. Celia, flustered, retreated. By the afternoon, she was following him at a cautious distance, narrating her own actions in a desperate, cheerful monotone. "I'm picking up the blue ball, Leo. Look, the blue ball." Leo put his hands over his ears. Oliver turned away from the window, a familiar despair settling in his bones. He missed the moment, later that afternoon, when Amara slipped away again. Joseph was repairing a sprinkler head, his back turned for 30 seconds. It was all she needed. This time she went straight to the nursery door. It was closed. She knocked. A tiny three-knuckle rap. Inside, Leo stopped rocking. Celia, thinking it was Sophia, called, "Come in." Amara pushed the door open. She saw the stranger first, a woman with a kind, tired face. Then she saw Leo curled in his soft chair. She walked past Celia as if she were a piece of furniture, went to Leo and held out her hand. In it was a dandelion gone to seed, a fluffy white globe. "Make a wish," she said. Celia was stunned into silence. Leo looked at the dandelion. He uncurled slightly. Amara blew on it, sending a cascade of tiny parachutes into the air. One landed on Leo's knee. He stared at it. Then, with a movement so slow it was almost imperceptible, he lifted his finger and touched it. The seed stuck. He brought his finger close to his face, cross-eyed, to look at it. Celia found her voice. "Oh, hello, and who are you?" Amara ignored her. She was focused on Leo. "You try." She plucked another dandelion from the pocket of her overalls. She had a small collection and offered it. Leo did not take it, but he blew, a weak, soundless puff of air. A few seeds drifted away, a ghost of a reaction, but a reaction nonetheless. Celia watched, her professional binder forgotten on the floor. She saw what 50 nannies before her had never seen, a point of entry. When Sophia and Joseph discovered Amara missing again, their panic had a new, specific address. They found her in the nursery, sitting on the floor with Celia, all three of them blowing dandelion seeds. Leo was watching, a single seed still stuck to his finger. The scene was so absurd, so peaceful, that all Joseph could do was apologize profusely to Celia. Celia stood up, brushing seeds from her slacks. She looked from Joseph to Sophia, her expression thoughtful. "How often does she come here?" "It will not happen again," Joseph said firmly, grabbing Amara's hand. "Wait," Celia said. She knelt down to Amara's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Amara." "Do you like playing with Leo?" Amara nodded, serious. "He's quiet, I like quiet." Celia looked up at Joseph, a strange light in her eyes. "Mr. Thorne, he has no idea, does he?" That evening, Celia requested a meeting with Oliver. She sat in his austere study and gave her report. Leo had been resistant to structured activities, she said, but she had observed a potential avenue for engagement. She was careful, professional. She did not mention the gardener's daughter by name. She spoke of informal, peer-like interaction and non-demanding parallel play. She suggested that perhaps, with careful management, introducing a calm, consistent peer model could be incorporated into his therapy plan. Oliver listened, his fingers steepled. It sounded like jargon, but it was the first glimmer of a non-catastrophic report he'd received in months. He authorized her to develop a proposal. What he did not know was that the peer model had already been chosen and was currently in her cottage bath, telling her father about the boy who liked dandelion wishes. A pattern began, unauthorized and unseen. Celia, instead of fighting the inevitable, became its facilitator. She would leave the nursery door slightly ajar during her shifts. Amara, with the unerring instinct of a homing pigeon, would find her way there. Sometimes Joseph knew, sometimes in his exhaustion he did not. Sophia became the silent conductor, orchestrating schedules, creating alibis. For 2 weeks it worked. Leo and Amara's interactions were tiny, silent earthquakes. He began to anticipate her visits, waiting by the door at certain times. He never smiled at her, but he would sometimes make a soft, clicking sound with his tongue when she arrived, a sound Celia had never heard before. Oliver, monitoring from a distance, saw only that Celia was having more success than her predecessors. Leo seemed slightly less tense. There were fewer meltdowns during her shifts. He approved a bonus for her. He still saw his son as a complex problem slowly being optimized. He did not see the agent of change. The crack in this fragile system came from the outside world. Oliver's board of directors was growing impatient. His focus on his son was seen as a distraction. Key decisions were being delayed. His second-in-command, a sharp-elbowed woman named Vanessa, sent a terse email. "The Q2 strategy review requires your full attention. We need you back in the game, Oliver." The unspoken subtext, "or we will find someone who is." Pressure mounted. Oliver scheduled more meetings, longer calls. He spent less time observing the nursery and more time in his study, staring at spreadsheets that suddenly seemed meaningless. The silence of the house began to morph from a sad fact into a personal indictment. He was failing here too. And then the staffing agency, Evelyn's firm, called. It was a polite, firm termination of services. They regretted that they could no longer meet the needs of the Thorne household. The liability, they gently implied, was too great. The well of qualified candidates was dry. Oliver hung up the phone and sat in the gathering dark. Celia was his last line of defense. When her contract was up in a month, there would be no one to replace her. He didn't know that Celia was already planning her exit, not because of Leo, but because of the ethical weight of the secret she was keeping. The deception gnawed at her. She had written a proposal for a formal peer-mediated play program, but she knew Oliver would never approve the specific, uncredentialed peer she had in mind. She decided she would tell him the truth at their next weekly review. She never got the chance. The day before the meeting, Amara, in a moment of exuberance, tried to show Leo how to spin until you fell down. She spun, laughed, got dizzy, and fell, not hard, but her elbow knocked against the sharp corner of a wooden toy chest. The cut was small but bled dramatically. Amara's wail was one of shock, not serious pain, but it was a sound of distress Leo had never heard from her. He froze, then let out a panicked, echoing scream, his hands clamped over his ears. Celia rushed to Amara, applying a tissue to the cut. It was at that moment that Oliver, drawn by the unfamiliar chorus of cries, walked into the nursery. He saw his son screaming in terror. He saw a bleeding, muddy child he vaguely recognized as the gardener's daughter in the arms of his nanny. He saw chaos in his son's sacred, controlled space. His vision tunneled. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was dangerously quiet. All hell was about to break loose. But in the eye of the storm, something else happened. Through her tears, Amara saw Leo's distress. She pushed Celia's hand away, scrambled to her feet, and ignoring her own bleeding elbow, walked to Leo. She didn't touch him. She sat down heavily in front of him, blocking his view of the adults. She held up her own elbow with its tiny bead of blood and then pointed to a faint, older scrape on her knee. "See," she sniffled. "I get ouchies too. It's okay." Leo's screams died into hitched, silent sobs, his eyes locked on her elbow. The connection, even in disaster, held. Oliver Thorne stood in the doorway, his anger momentarily short-circuited by the sight. His reclusive, untouchable son was staring, transfixed at another child's minor injury. He was not looking away. He was *connected* in his distress. Oliver had just been officially abandoned by the professional world. His company was demanding a version of himself he could no longer give. And here, in this ruined nursery, was the only thing that had ever worked, bleeding onto his rug. He didn't fire anyone, not yet. In a voice he barely recognized, he said, "Clean her up. Then everyone, my study, now." The study was a tomb of polished wood and cold glass. Oliver stood behind his desk, his back to them, staring out at the garden he never entered. In the room, standing in a stiff line, were Celia, Sophia, and Joseph, who held a now-calmed Amara on his hip, a bright blue bandage stark on her elbow. The silence was a physical weight. When Oliver finally turned, his face was not the expected mask of fury. It was the blank, controlled expression of a man running a catastrophic cost-benefit analysis. "Start from the beginning," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "And do not leave anything out." Celia spoke first, her professional composure cracking. She confessed everything: the first accidental visit, the unauthorized meetings, the dandelions, the blocks, the silent companionship. She presented it not as a rebellion but as an observation. "He responds to her, Mr. Thorne, in a way he has never responded to any structured therapy or any adult. She doesn't demand anything from him. She just is, and he allows her to be there." Sophia spoke next, her voice steady with the defiance of someone who knows they've broken the rules for a higher purpose. She explained the childcare gaps, her own decision to bend policy. "I saw no harm. I saw progress." Then it was Joseph's turn. He held his daughter tighter. "Sir, I take full responsibility. I was not watchful enough. We will pack our things tonight. You have my resignation." His voice was thick, but his head was high. He expected dismissal. He was prepared for it. Oliver didn't look at him. He was looking at Amara. The girl was studying the room with open curiosity, one arm looped around her father's neck, the other bandaged elbow held out slightly. She wasn't cowed. She was assessing. "What is your name?" Oliver asked, the question directed at the child. Amara, she said, clear as a bell. Do you like playing with Leo? She nodded. He's my friend, he's quiet like Kobo. She held up her one-eyed giraffe. Oliver's jaw tightened. He looked at Celia. You said you had a proposal. Celia, thrown by the shift, fumbled in her bag and produced a folder. A formal peer-mediated intervention plan. It's evidence-based. It would require a consistent, carefully vetted peer model, supervised sessions, specific goals. Oliver took the folder. He didn't open it. He placed it on the desk. The agency terminated our contract today. You are, effectively, the last professional caregiver on Earth willing to work here. He let that statement hang. Your proposal requires a peer model. Where do you propose we find this mythical child? The room held its breath. Celia glanced at Joseph and Amara. I believe we may have already found one. An uncredentialed 3-year-old, the daughter of an employee I just caught in a flagrant violation of protocol. Oliver's voice was dangerously soft. That is your professional recommendation. Celia met his gaze. My professional observation is that it is working. The why is a question for later. The that it works is a fact. Oliver turned back to the window. The garden was green and gold in the late afternoon sun. He thought of the 50 resumes, the red asterisk, the board's impatient emails, the scream of his son that had, minutes ago, been silenced not by a professional, but by a scraped elbow on a girl who called him her friend. He was a man who built empires on data, and the data in front of him was irrefutable, however messy its source. Joseph, Oliver said, still facing the window, you are not fired, your daughter is not banned. He heard a sharp intake of breath behind him. But this experiment ends now. It was conducted without consent, without controls, and it resulted in an injury. He turned, finally addressing the nanny. Celia, you are dismissed for breach of contract. You will be paid through the end of the month. Sophia, your discretion in this matter has been a liability. You are on probation. The verdict was delivered without heat. It was a CEO restructuring a failing division. Celia looked stricken but nodded. Sophia bowed her head. Joseph just stood, confused, holding his daughter who was now playing with his collar. However, Oliver continued, picking up Celia's proposal, I am authorizing a new initiative, a 6-week trial of a formal peer-mediated play program. It will be designed and overseen by a new consulting therapist I will hire. The peer model will be selected from a pool of vetted candidates. He looked directly at Joseph. Your daughter may apply to be in that pool. She will be assessed like any other candidate. There will be rules, contracts, liability waivers, scheduled sessions. No more wandering, no more secrets, is that understood? It was a brutal clinical offer. It turned a fragile human connection into a corporate pilot program, but it was a lifeline. Joseph, understanding the magnitude of the alternative, nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Good, Celia, you will brief your replacement. Everyone else get out. The new therapist arrived within 72 hours. Dr. Alastair Finch was a man in his 50s with a perfectly trimmed beard and a reputation for results. He reviewed Celia's notes, observed Leo alone for 2 hours, and then designed a protocol. The peer model would be introduced in 15-minute increments, twice daily. Specific toys would be used. Data would be collected on eye contact, vocalizations, and interactive play. It was a world away from dandelions and shared silence. Amara, now an official candidate, was brought in for assessment. She was placed in a playroom with Leo under Dr. Finch's watchful eye. Leo, sensing the new expectant pressure, shut down. He retreated to a corner and rocked. Amara, instructed to engage with the target child, instead sat near him and started telling a story about Kobo to the wall. It was not what the protocol demanded. Dr. Finch made a note. Peer model is undirected and off-task. The first formal session was a disaster. Leo cried. Amara kept looking at the large observation mirror, sensing the watching adults. The connection was gone, replaced by a sterile performance. After 3 days of this, Dr. Finch presented his interim findings to Oliver. The child shows potential as a passive presence, but she lacks the discipline to execute the intervention. I recommend we source a different peer, preferably older, one who can follow instruction. Oliver, watching the failed sessions on video, felt a cold dread. He had institutionalized the magic and killed it. That night, he found Leo in the nursery, not by the window but by the door, just sitting, as if waiting for something that no longer came in the right way. The boy's silence felt different. It felt like loss. Meanwhile, the pressure from Nexus Systems reached a boiling point. Vanessa, his second, called an emergency board meeting. Oliver attended via video from his study. The questions were direct and brutal: product delays, missed projections, his prolonged personal leave. One board member, an old rival, pointedly suggested an interim CEO be appointed to steady the ship. Oliver fought back with cold, sharp logic, but he could feel the tide turning. He hung up the call and knew he was at the edge of losing everything. His company, the one identity he had left. He walked the halls, a ghost in his own home, and found himself outside the staff sitting room. He heard a sound from within, small, hiccuping sobs. He peered in. Amara was curled on the sofa, her face buried in Joseph's chest. Joseph was stroking her hair, whispering in Zulu. "She does not understand," Joseph said softly, without looking up. "She says she broke the boy. She says the new doctor is angry and Leo is sad. She does not want to apply anymore." Oliver stood in the doorway, an intruder. He saw the bandage on the girl's elbow, now frayed at the edges. He saw the stuffed giraffe, discarded on the floor. He had taken a simple human thing and turned it into a metric, and in doing so, he had broken 2 children. "I will speak to Dr. Finch," Oliver said, the words feeling hollow. Joseph finally looked at him. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, resonant exhaustion. "Sir, with respect, you can hire 100 doctors. They will give you 100 plans, but they do not hear what the children are saying without words." He gathered Amara up. "We will finish the week as per the contract. Then I think we must go." The next morning, Oliver canceled the session. He told Dr. Finch his services were no longer required. The man left, offended and baffled. Oliver then did something he had not done in over a year. He asked Sophia to have Joseph bring Amara to the garden at 10 a.m. He gave no other instructions. At the appointed time, Oliver wheeled Leo out into the spring air. The boy was tense, confused by the break in routine. They stopped on the gravel path near the stone fountain. A minute later, Joseph appeared at the garden gate with Amara. She hung back, clutching her father's leg, her earlier confidence shattered by the failed sessions. Oliver nodded to Joseph. "Let her come, just let her come." Joseph gave his daughter a gentle nudge. Amara walked slowly down the path, kobo in hand. She stopped a few feet from Leo's wheelchair. She didn't try to play. She just looked at him, her big eyes wide and worried. Leo stared at his own knees. The silence stretched. Oliver's plan, if he had one, evaporated. He was about to admit defeat when Amara took a deep breath. She walked to a flower bed, picked a single, open dandelion, and walked back. She didn't offer it to Leo. She held it up to her own lips, puffed her cheeks, and blew. A cloud of seeds drifted across the space between them, catching the sunlight. One landed on the arm of Leo's wheelchair. Leo's eyes tracked it. Slowly, so slowly, he lifted a finger and brushed it off. Then he looked at Amara, not at the dandelion, not at the ground, at her. Amara smiled, a small, hopeful thing. "Hi, Leo." And Leo, for the first time in Oliver's hearing, made a sound that was not a cry of distress. It was a soft, breathy sigh. "Hi." The word was barely audible, a whisper lost in the garden breeze, but it was a word, a name, a connection spoken aloud. Oliver felt something in his chest crack open. He looked at Joseph, who stood at the gate, his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking silently. He looked at his son, who was now watching Amara pluck another dandelion. The protocols, the rules, the billion-dollar plans, they all dissolved in the face of that one whispered word. But the real world had not stopped. As Oliver stood in the garden, his phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Vanessa, the board, the crisis was now. He had to choose in that moment which empire to save. He took the phone from his pocket. He looked at the screen, at the garden, at his son's face turned toward the light. He made a decision. He accepted the call, and before Vanessa could launch into her update, he said 3 words that would change everything. Vanessa, stand down. There was a special kind of silence on the other end of the phone line. Vanessa, Oliver's razor-sharp second-in-command, was not used to being told to stand down. Oliver, the board is convening in 15 minutes. If you're not on this call, they will vote on the interim leadership proposal. Oliver watched a dandelion seed land on his son's knee. Leo looked at it, then at Amara, who was now searching for a 4-leaf clover in the grass. Let them vote, Oliver said, his voice calm. Tell them I am recusing myself from the day-to-day, effective immediately. You're in charge, Vanessa. Run the company. The gasps from the garden were not audible over the line, but he felt them. Joseph stared. Sophia, who had come to the doorway, clutched her apron. Oliver ended the call and put the phone in his pocket. The weight that left his shoulders was not relief. It was the sensation of a planet sliding off its axis. He had just voluntarily surrendered the thing that had defined him for 15 years. For what? For a whisper in a garden. He looked at his son. Leo was now holding the dandelion Amara had given him, turning it slowly by the stem. Oliver knelt, his expensive trousers sinking into the damp earth. Leo, he said softly. The boy's eyes flicked toward him, a fleeting glance, but a glance nonetheless. Would you like Amara to visit again, like before? Leo didn't nod, he didn't speak, but he let the dandelion fall into his lap and placed his hand over it. A claim, an answer. Oliver stood, brushing the soil from his knees. He addressed Joseph, who still looked like a man awaiting execution. Joseph, your job is secure. Your daughter, her job, if she wants it, is to be Leo's friend. On her terms, on his terms. No more doctors, no more protocols, just play. Will you allow that? Joseph could only nod, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. The world Oliver had left did not go quietly. The board voted him out as executive chairman. The financial blogs wrote speculative, concerned pieces. Nexus Systems founder steps back amid family struggles. The narrative was one of collapse. Inside the estate, however, a different kind of structure was being built, brick by fragile brick. Oliver drafted a simple, 1-page agreement. Joseph would be paid a substantial stipend, not as a gardener but as a resident child life facilitator, a title Oliver invented. Amara, work, was to be present. There were only 2 rules, safety and respect for Leo's cues. The laminated list of 23 rules was taken down from the staff door and shredded. The first week was a delicate recalibration. Oliver, now physically present in the house without the buffer of a screen filled with charts, had to learn to be still. He would sit in the nursery, reading a book, while Leo and Amara occupied their own quiet world. He watched as Amara, with the innate wisdom of a child, perfected the art of parallel presence. She would build a tower, narrating her actions to Kobo, while Leo lined up cars beside her. They were 2 separate solitudes, but they were choosing to be separate together. The pressure to interact was gone, and in its absence, interaction began to spark. Leo started leaving objects for her, a smooth stone on the windowsill where she usually sat, a single blue block placed next to her yellow one. Amara accepted these offerings with solemn gravity. "Thank you, Leo," she would say, and he would blink, a rapid flutter of acknowledgement. Oliver began to join them in the garden, not to oversee but to be. He would push Leo's wheelchair along the paths, with Amara running ahead to point out a butterfly or a particularly interesting rock. One afternoon, he found himself explaining to Amara why the roses were pruned in a certain way. She listened, then asked, "But does it hurt the flower?" Oliver, who had only ever thought of the horticultural science, was stumped. "I don't think so," he said. "It helps it grow stronger." "Oh," Amara said, satisfied, "like ouchies." The simplicity of it leveled him. He started talking to Joseph, not as employer to employee, but as one father to another. He learned about grace. Joseph, in turn, saw the man beneath the billionaire, a man haunted not by greed, but by a helplessness money could not fix. The house began to breathe. Sophia played music in the kitchen, soft, classical pieces that drifted through the halls. The smell of Mrs. Patton's baking, something that had stopped after Claire's death, returned as Sophia experimented with recipes she thought the children might like. The dining table, which had been a monument to unused space, was set for 3 every day: Oliver, Leo, and Amara. Joseph initially refused to join, citing propriety, until Oliver stated it wasn't a request. "You are not staff at this table. You are her father, sit." They ate in awkward silence at first. Then Amara would tell a story about Kobo, and Leo would watch her, and sometimes he would make a soft, clicking sound of attention. Progress was measured in micro-moments. The day Leo reached for a carrot stick from the same plate as Amara without flinching. The day he made a sound of protest when she had to leave for her nap. The day Oliver heard, clear as day from the next room, Amara's giggle followed by a low, rusty chuckle that could only belong to his son. Oliver was not in a boardroom, but he was working harder than he ever had. He was learning a new language, one of patience and subtle cues. He hired a part-time occupational therapist, not to fix Leo, but to give him tools for the world, with the explicit instruction that Amara was to be incorporated as a partner, not a subject. The therapist, a young woman named Maya, was initially skeptical until she saw them together. "It's peer-mediated interaction in its purest, most organic form," she told Oliver. "The literature supports it. We just usually try to structure it. They've structured themselves." Months passed. The news cycles moved on from Oliver Thorne's retreat. Inside the gates, summer bloomed. The garden, always physically perfect, now felt alive. It had an audience. One afternoon, Oliver found Leo and Amara by the stone bench where he had first heard Leo speak. Amara was tracing the engraved letters on the bench with her finger. "What does it say?" she asked Oliver. He hadn't been to that bench in years. He walked over, his heart a drum in his chest. "It says, for Claire, who loved the light here." It was his wife's memorial bench, the one he had turned his chair away from for so long. "Who's Claire?" Amara asked. "She was Leo's mother, my wife." Amara absorbed this. She looked at Leo, who was watching a ladybug climb a blade of grass. "She sleep here." "No, but she loved this spot, so we put her name here to remember." Amara nodded, her face serious. Then she did something extraordinary. She walked to Leo, took his hand, a gesture she now knew he tolerated from her, and led him to the bench. She placed his palm flat on the carved letters. "Your mama," she said softly. "She liked the light." Leo's hand stayed there. He didn't pull away. He looked from his hand to the letters, to the dappled sunlight on the stone. Then he looked at Oliver, and in his eyes was not confusion, but a deep, quiet knowing. A connection across time, facilitated by a 3-year-old who understood memory as a thing you touched. Oliver felt the last of the ice around his heart shatter. He didn't cry, but his vision blurred. He put his hand over Leo's, which was still on the engraving. They stood there, the 3 of them, connected by stone and sunlight and loss, and for the first time, the loss did not feel like an empty space. It felt like something they shared. That evening, Oliver asked Joseph to meet him in the study. Joseph arrived anxious. Oliver gestured to a chair. "I am restructuring the trust that holds my shares in Nexus," Oliver began, his business voice returning but softer at the edges. "A portion of the dividends will be allocated to a new foundation, the Claire and Leo Thorne Foundation for Neurodiversity and Peer Support Programs." He slid a paper across the desk. "I want you to sit on its board, not as a gardener, as a parent. As someone who understands the reality on the ground, not just the theory." Joseph read the document, his hands trembling. "Sir, I am not an educated man for this." "You are the most educated man I know on what actually works," Oliver said. "The Foundation's first initiative will be funding peer play programs in schools based on what we've learned here. No heavy therapy frameworks, just creating spaces for connection, like you and Sophia did when you left a door open. Joseph accepted. The final surprise, the detail that never made the business pages, came a year later. Nexus Systems, under Vanessa's fierce leadership, had not collapsed. It had stabilized, then grown. Oliver, freed from daily operations, began consulting on special projects, his focus sharper without the constant noise. He used his newfound time to advocate, quietly but powerfully, for inclusive approaches to developmental support. He became an unexpected voice in the world of neurodiversity, citing not just data, but lived experience. The real change was in the house's mailing address. The cottage was renovated, expanded. Joseph and Amara moved in permanently, not as live-in staff, but as family. The legal paperwork called it a reciprocal care and residence agreement. The children just called it home. Amara started a local preschool in the mornings, and in the afternoons she and Leo had their playtime, which was now just their time. Oliver no longer watched from behind glass. He was often on the floor with them, building block towers that were deliberately imperfect, learning from a little girl that a sideways block wasn't a mistake, it was a bridge. Leo's world, once a silent, terrified pinpoint, had expanded. He was not cured. He was Leo. A boy who loved order, who spoke rarely but with precision when he did, who had a best friend who carried a one-eyed giraffe and understood his silence. The story doesn't end with a magical healing. It ends with a morning, a regular Tuesday. Oliver is making coffee in the kitchen. Leo is at the table, carefully spreading jam on toast. Amara runs in, late as usual, her hair a wild cloud. Sorry, Kobo was hiding. She slides into her seat next to Leo. He wordlessly pushes the jar of jam closer to her. She beams. Thanks, Lily. Oliver turns, leans against the counter, and watches them. The silence in the house is gone. It has been replaced by the quiet, profound noise of a life being lived. Not a problem to be solved, but a story being written together, one small, shared moment at a time. It is not an ending. It is, finally, a beginning. And that is where our documentary must leave them. So what do we take from a story like this? That money is powerless. No, that expertise is worthless. Absolutely not. The real lesson is far more subtle and far more human. Sometimes the most advanced tools in the world cannot solve a problem of the heart. Sometimes the connection that heals doesn't come from a resume, but from a shared silence over a line of red blocks, from a dandelion wish in a sunlit garden, from the stubborn, simple act of showing up, without an agenda and just being there. Oliver Thorne had to surrender the identity he thought defined him, the billionaire, the fixer, the CEO, to become the one thing his son truly needed, a present father. Joseph Mbatha had to risk the security of a job to protect the authenticity of his daughter's spirit. And in that risk, they found a new form of family, not bound by blood or contract, but by mutual need and earned trust. This story isn't about a magical child. It's about the conditions that allow magic to happen. It's about stripping away the noise, the expectations, the protocols, the fear of failure, and listening to what is actually working, no matter how unconventional it looks. It's about the power of peer connection, a force so potent that clinical studies now confirm what this little girl demonstrated in that nursery, that sometimes a friend can reach where a professional cannot. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when an unexpected person saw you in a way no one else did, then you understand why we tell these stories. We don't shout here. We don't chase trends. We sit with the quiet narratives that reveal our shared humanity, the band-aids with cartoon stars, the drawings of two circles, the small hands that hold on and refuse to let go in the face of silence. These are the moments that change lives, and they almost never make the news. So we build this channel for you. If you believe in the power of these stories, hit subscribe. Become part of a community that values depth over drama. Leave a comment below about a time when a simple, human connection made all the difference. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that healing often begins not with a breakthrough, but with a presence. There are so many more stories worth staying for, and we'll be here telling them as long as you're here to listen. Thank you for watching.